Welcome back to Avoidant Decoded. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and join the membership because this is exactly the kind of channel that helps you understand men, relationships, and yourself on a much deeper level. Most people think avoidant men run from feelings. That's not quite it. What they're really running from is being fully seen, because being seen means losing the image they've spent years perfecting. But every so often, a woman shows up who isn't impressed, isn't shaken, and isn't waiting around for his approval. And without her saying a single word, his whole carefully built armor starts to crack. Avoidant men aren't really guarding their emotions. What they're actually guarding is the image they've spent years constructing. Underneath it all, a lot of them cling to the idea that they're unreadable, hard to affect, and always the one steering the relationship. That image becomes part of who they think they are. The person who stays cool, keeps distance, and never lets themselves need anyone too much. But then something happens. They run into a woman who doesn't buy into that image, and everything starts to wobble. It's not because she's trying to knock him down a peg or humble him in some obvious way. It's simply that her presence, without her even trying, reveals the insecurity hiding underneath all that control. She's not dazzled by his attention. She doesn't fall apart the moment he pulls back. She doesn't act like being chosen by him is some kind of jackpot. For an avoidant man, that flips the whole emotional script. Welcome to Avoidant Decoded. In this video, we're diving into why the women who end up living rent-free in an avoidant man's head are usually the ones who push against his ego without even meaning to, not through games or tricks, but simply by having emotional self-respect, staying calm, and genuinely standing on their own. Point 1. Build a life that's whole with or without him. Few things throw an avoidant man off balance like meeting a woman whose happiness isn't tied to whether he's around. Not the kind of confidence that's put on for show, not some strategic version of not caring, actual peace, actual fulfillment. A woman who's genuinely enjoying her life whether he texts back, pulls away, or vanishes for a stretch. Avoidant men usually count on emotional dependency because it backs up the narrative they've told themselves for a long time, that when they create space, the other person will spiral, overanalyze everything, and chase harder just to feel secure again. That reaction is what keeps their sense of control intact. It proves to them that they're the emotionally stronger one. But when you stay grounded instead of anxious, it throws that whole story off. Psychologically, avoidant people usually build their emotional armor by convincing themselves they don't really need anybody. Their independence is part self-preservation, part identity. But that identity only holds up when the people around them seem emotionally reliant on them. The second you stop playing that part, something in their system doesn't sit right. When you keep showing up for your friendships, your work, your goals, your own growth, without letting your world spin around him, you stop giving him what he's used to. Suddenly, he can't put you in a neat little box, and people are naturally drawn to what they can't quite predict. This is usually where things go sideways for a lot of women because they try to fake indifference while secretly hoping the act will make him chase them. Avoidant men pick up on pressure fast. They've spent years quietly watching for any sign that someone wants more closeness than they're ready to give. So if your calm is forced, he'll sense it right away. But real emotional steadiness lands differently. When your energy says, "I like having you around, but I don't need you to feel whole," it catches him off guard. He's suddenly dealing with something unusual, a woman whose emotional world isn't circling his approval. And because that's rare, it sticks with him a lot longer than any amount of chasing ever would. Point 2. Stop rushing back to him every time he pulls away. Most avoidant men are used to a familiar rhythm. They retreat, and the other person leans in harder. They go quiet, and the woman puts in more effort to fix things. They emotionally check out, and someone else scrambles to patch the connection back together. Over time, that pattern becomes a kind of comfort blanket for them. It tells them they still matter, that their pulling away still has weight, because someone always reacts. But once you stop chasing and instead just mirror the energy you're actually being given, everything shifts. That doesn't mean going cold or playing petty games. It means responding like an adult. If he gets inconsistent, you stop stretching yourself thin, trying to hold the connection together alone. If he needs space, you let him have it, instead of fighting for his attention. That's exactly where his confidence starts to crack, because now he's facing something he's not used to, not knowing. When an avoidant man expects to be chased and it doesn't happen, his mind starts filling in the blanks on its own. He starts wondering if your feelings are cooling off. He starts questioning whether your attention has drifted somewhere else. He realizes your world might not be revolving around him the way he assumed. That uncertainty is uncomfortable for him. A lot of avoidant people fear closeness on the surface, but buried underneath that is often a real fear of being left behind. The reason they usually seem so unbothered is that they believe they're the ones controlling how close things get. But the moment that control feels shaky, their whole attachment system kicks into a different gear. Now he's the one thinking about you more. Now he's the one checking his phone. Now he's the one wondering why your energy shifted. Ironically, the distance he once used as a power move becomes exactly what pulls him in emotionally. The women who trigger this shift aren't scheming. They've simply reached a point where they refuse to abandon themselves just to keep someone else comfortable. They stop making him the center of their emotional universe, and that self-respect changes the dynamic far more than patience ever could. Point 3. Be willing to end conversations first. A lot of avoidant men are deeply used to being in charge of emotional timing. They decide when a conversation starts, when it winds down, when it's over. That control gives them a sense of safety because it lets them manage closeness on their own terms. So when a woman is always the one lingering, always wanting to talk longer, always stretching things out, it quietly feeds his sense of authority in the relationship. But when you're the one who naturally wraps things up first sometimes, especially in a good moment, it sends a powerful message. It says you have abundance in your life. It says your world stays full, even without him in it. It shows that being with him is something you enjoy, not something you're clinging to. That distinction matters more than most people give it credit for, because avoidant men tend to get most fixated on women who feel just a little hard to fully pin down, not distant, not toxic, just grounded enough that they don't put the relationship above themselves. When you end a conversation warmly, before he expects it, his mind keeps working on it after you've gone. Part of him starts wondering where your attention went, what else is filling your time, why you don't seem desperate to keep talking. That curiosity doesn't fade. It builds, and over time it turns into something closer to fixation. The truth is, avoidant men rarely change because of pressure, chasing, or constant reassurance. What actually gets to them is meeting someone who reflects the same emotional imbalance they're used to creating. Someone who values connection, but values herself more. Because once he realizes he can't control your emotional availability on autopilot, everything about how he sees you shifts. You're no longer predictable. You're no longer convenient. In a lot of cases, you become the one he can't stop thinking about. Point 4. Stop being instantly available around the clock. One of the most common mistakes women make with avoidant men is assuming that being constantly reachable will bring them closer. In reality, it often does the opposite. With avoidant personalities especially, always replying fast and being endlessly accessible can quietly cheapen how much value they place on the connection. This isn't about playing games or holding back replies to manufacture anxiety. It's about actually having a full life outside of him. When he sends a message and you drop everything every single time, his mind quietly registers that your attention is always on standby, always ready to shift toward him. And while a lot of women think that reads as affection, to an avoidant mindset it often reads as dependency. That dependency creates pressure, and avoidant men are especially sensitive to feeling responsible for someone else's emotions. So when your behavior signals that his text is instantly your top priority, it reinforces his belief that he holds all the power. But when your responses come from a place of genuine bandwidth instead of urgency, the whole dynamic changes. You reply when it fits naturally into your day. You keep living your life instead of dropping everything the second your phone buzzes. And through that, you're communicating something genuinely magnetic to an avoidant man, that your world is already full. That's what sparks intrigue, because now he realizes he's stepping into your life, not steering it. Psychologically, people tend to place more value on what doesn't feel endlessly available. It's not scarcity for scarcity's sake. It's that independence signals stability. When someone seems perpetually on call, the brain quietly assumes there's nothing else competing for their attention. No strong inner world, no real balance. But a woman who moves at her own pace feels different. She's warm without being desperate, present without being consumed, interested without hovering by the door waiting for his attention. For avoidant men specifically, this sparks something. They start wondering what's occupying your time, what else matters to you, whether they actually hold the significance they assumed they did. And that uncertainty shifts them from passively enjoying the connection to actively pursuing it. The women avoidant men tend to fixate on aren't usually the ones working hardest to hold their attention. They're the ones who keep their emotional footing steady without letting the relationship become their whole identity. Instead of confirming his unspoken belief that every woman eventually orbits around him, you quietly prove that your attention is something earned, not owed. Point 5. Stop over-explaining yourself. Avoidant men often get used to women constantly justifying their feelings, their boundaries, their choices, not always because they're demanding it outright, but because their emotional style creates a climate where women feel they have to defend their own needs to be taken seriously. So many women fall into the habit of explaining everything. Why they felt hurt, why they're busy, why they set a boundary, why they need consistency. And without even noticing, they end up putting the avoidant man in the position of judge, as if he gets to decide whether their feelings are valid enough to be respected. But the second you stop over-explaining, something shifts in a big way. A short, simple statement suddenly carries real weight. I'm not free this weekend. That doesn't work for me. I need consistent communication. No lengthy justification attached, no apology, no piling on reassurance afterward, just calm and clear. To an avoidant man, that kind of grounded communication feels foreign because it reflects self-trust. It tells him you don't need his approval to honor what you need. And that challenges his ego in a very particular way, because he can no longer quietly steer things through withdrawal, confusion, or subtle disapproval. You're not reshaping yourself to keep him comfortable anymore. You're simply saying what works for you and letting him decide whether he meets you there. That kind of self-possession is rare. Most people lose pieces of themselves trying to keep avoidant partners comfortable, softening their boundaries, muting their needs, tolerating inconsistency until they start doubting their own instincts. But once you stop bargaining away your reality just to avoid losing him, your energy shifts. It gets steadier, stronger, harder to manipulate. And whether he can put it into words or not, he feels that change immediately because now he's dealing with a woman who trusts herself, someone who doesn't fall apart at the first sign of tension, someone who isn't constantly hunting for validation that her feelings are allowed. For an avoidant man whose ego has usually been propped up by women over-accommodating him, that becomes genuinely magnetic. Point 6. Compliment him less, but understand him more. Most women get this one backwards. They assume non-stop admiration will make him feel safer and more open, so they keep feeding him surface-level praise. You're so attractive. You're amazing. You're so smart. He might enjoy hearing it, but it rarely leaves a real mark, since it just echoes the image he already shows the world. Generic compliments boost the ego for a moment, but they don't build closeness. In fact, avoidant men usually get plenty of admiration already. What they rarely get is the experience of feeling truly understood beneath that surface. That's the real difference. Broad praise flatters the identity, but accurate observation reaches the person underneath it. Instead of constant flattery, the women who stick in an avoidant man's mind are usually the ones who notice things other people miss. His discipline, the way he masks stress with humor, the moments he goes quiet when something actually matters, the small ways he tries to show he cares without saying it outright. Those observations hit differently because they make him feel seen instead of simply admired. And oddly enough, when compliments become rarer but more deliberate, they carry more weight because your approval no longer feels automatic. It feels earned. Avoidant men are usually moved far more by genuine recognition than non-stop praise. Not because they crave worship, but because underneath the armor, many of them quietly worry that if someone really saw who they are, they might not stick around. So when you notice something real about them without overdoing it, without trying to win them over, it leaves an impression that lasts well past the moment. Cut back on how often you compliment him and make what you do say specific. Instead of, "You're amazing," try, "That was really thoughtful of you to remember what I told you about my mum." Instead of, "You're so smart," try, "The way you broke that down showed real emotional insight." That shift from vague admiration to precise recognition changes everything because you're not just reacting to him or feeding his ego on autopilot. You're showing him you actually pay attention, that you see the meaning behind what he does rather than just the surface. It tells him your words aren't currency you're spending to keep his interest. You're not handing out approval to maintain access. You're naming something real when it genuinely stands out. That kind of specificity lands far deeper than constant flattery. Generic compliments are easy to give, easy to forget, easy to dismiss. Specific recognition does something different. It makes him feel understood, and for avoidant men, who spend so much energy managing how they're perceived, being seen in those small, honest moments creates a closeness they can't easily brush aside. It stops being about looks or charm and starts being about character. And because you're not constantly praising him anymore, the moments when you do say something land with far more weight. They stand out. They stay with him. Over time, he starts valuing those moments, starts becoming more conscious of how he shows up. Not for approval, but for genuine acknowledgement. The woman who flatters him constantly fades into the background of normal. The woman who only speaks up when it really counts becomes the one whose opinion actually matters to him. Point 7. Stop competing for his attention. This might sound backwards, but refusing to compete for an avoidant man's attention is often exactly what flips the dynamic in your favor. An avoidant man tends to give attention inconsistently, sometimes fully present, sometimes emotionally gone, sometimes pulling back with no explanation. Most women respond by trying harder, becoming more available, more accommodating, hoping to earn consistency from someone only offering fragments. But that effort just reinforces his belief that he's the prize being chased, that his attention is scarce and worth competing for. When you step out of that entirely, when you stop trying to earn what should be freely given, you become something unfamiliar to him. No longer competing, no longer chasing, no longer treating his attention like it defines your emotional state. Instead, your behavior quietly says he isn't the center of your world. That's where the disruption happens, because now he's not dealing with someone trying to win him over. He's dealing with someone willing to walk away if inconsistency is what he offers. That reframes everything. Plenty of men later admit the women they couldn't forget weren't the ones who tried hardest, but the ones who never needed to. Not in a cold way, but a grounded, self-sufficient one. Women with full lives, clear direction, emotional steadiness, and options. Women who weren't waiting around to be chosen. And that changes how he sees things, because suddenly he realizes he's not irreplaceable in your life, just part of it. Once he's forced to face that, the equation flips. He's no longer just being pursued, he's being evaluated. And the fear of losing a woman who doesn't chase hits far harder than the comfort of keeping one who does. Point 8. Don't reward inconsistency. One of the most important shifts in dealing with avoidant men is breaking the habit of quietly reinforcing their inconsistency. Avoidant behavior tends to follow a familiar loop. He pulls away, goes quiet or physically distant, then comes back like nothing happened. And usually, what he gets in return is warmth, relief, and full emotional access. Not because women are weak, but because they're trying to hold on to the connection. Without meaning to, though, this teaches him something specific, that pulling away costs him nothing, that he can disappear without explanation, come back without accountability, and still get the same warm welcome. Once that pattern sets in, it just keeps repeating. Things change when you stop over-rewarding his return, not through punishment or coldness, but through neutrality and balance. If he vanishes and comes back with minimal effort, your response matches that energy. Not exaggerated warmth, not icy distance, just steady, grounded presence. You acknowledge him, but you don't pretend the gap didn't happen. You don't overcompensate to make up for his absence. You simply reflect his effort back to him as it actually was. That reflection breaks the cycle, because his inconsistency stops going unnoticed. It becomes visible, and that shakes avoidant men more than people expect, because it removes the safety net they've been relying on, the assumption they can withdraw freely and still return to full access. For a lot of women, this is the hardest part, because it brings real uncertainty. If you stop rewarding the inconsistency, he might not come back at all. But that fear is exactly what keeps so many women stuck in these lopsided cycles. Because if someone only sticks around when their inconsistency gets tolerated, they were never fully choosing you in the first place. They were choosing comfort without accountability. Once you stop feeding that pattern, one of two things happens. Either he steps up and starts showing up more consistently, or he fades out completely. Both outcomes can sting in the moment, but they're far clearer and healthier than staying tied to someone who only ever gives you pieces of themselves. Because clarity, even the uncomfortable kind, always beats the emotional limbo that keeps you stuck. In the end, none of this is really about controlling an avoidant man or making him obsessed with you. It's about something more grounded, self-respect, emotional balance, and refusing to abandon yourself just to keep someone close. Because when you strip it down, the real change doesn't start with him, it starts with you. The moment you stop over-giving your attention, over-explaining your worth, chasing inconsistency, and rewarding unpredictability, you stop operating from fear. You stop trying to earn love through effort or self-sacrifice. You start choosing yourself in real time, and that changes how every interaction feels. Some men respond with curiosity, some with discomfort, some pull further away, and some actually start showing up more consistently. But none of that is really the point. The real outcome is clarity. The right person will never ask you to shrink your needs, water down your boundaries, or fight for basic emotional presence. And the wrong dynamic will always show its true colors the moment you stop over-functioning to hold it together. So what this really leads to isn't obsession or emotional games, it's alignment. You either find someone who can meet your emotional maturity, or you free yourself from someone who can't. Either way, you come out ahead. None of this was ever about changing him, chasing him, or winning some quiet power struggle. It was about you refusing to disappear into someone else's comfort. Because the moment you stop shrinking, stop explaining, stop overgiving, you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. And that's the real shift. Not obsession, not control, just alignment. Either he rises to meet you, or you finally walk free of someone who never could.